Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. The first time their keys didn't fit my door, I was 3 miles away, sitting in a one-bedroom apartment whose walls still smelled like carpet glue and fresh paint. On my phone, the screen showed my old entryway in a clean, unblinking rectangle. The camera I'd hidden inside a harmless little charger caught everything: the way the afternoon light broke across the bevel in the glass, the way dust curled in the air like breath you could see, the way my daughter's hand trembled just slightly as she tried a second time, then a third, to make the deadbolt remember her. "Dylan, it's stuck," she said, breath shallow, voice pitched high the way it used to get when she was 5 and couldn't unknot her shoelace. "It's not stuck," her husband answered, jaw tight, eyes already flitting to the other locks. "Somebody changed it." On my screen, the envelopes I had taped inside the door, white against stained oak, waited like teeth. "I should tell you now, my name is Michael, I am 68 years old, and I thought I understood love. I thought I understood what it meant to build something with your hands until your knuckles ached and your back rang hollow like a bell. I thought the house I raised from a concrete slab 24 years ago would be the place I died in. I thought my daughter, Grace, would be the one to pack my books and whisper to the walls when the house felt too empty. I thought she would be the one to say, 'He was good. He was ours.' It's funny what you think you know until one sentence, overheard by accident, saws the floor out from beneath you. I didn't plan to become the sort of man who hides cameras and writes final letters. I didn't plan to sell the only evidence that I had loved anyone with all I had. But betrayal doesn't knock. It walks in like it owns the place and clears a spot at your table. This story begins with a dish I heated twice. Wednesday night. Leftover meatloaf, my late wife's recipe, though mine always leaned too salty without her hands to correct me. The plate had that chipped edge I never could throw away, a shallow half-moon missing from the rim. I ate standing up like I do now, because sitting at the dining table alone feels like pretending. The phone rang. "Dad," Grace said, and I swear the room brightened 2 shades. There are some voices that can make light, that can turn grief into something you can carry for a minute without stopping to rest. "How's my girl?" I asked, lowering myself into the recliner Evelyn used to read in. The leather held her shape the way a memory sometimes does, soft, persistent. "Busy. Phoenix is dry as bones," she laughed. "We're wrapping tomorrow. How are you eating? And don't say, 'fine,' if the answer is crackers." "Roasted steak," I lied. "And green beans." "You mean the canned kind?" "Maybe." We went through the ritual, her pretending she wasn't calling from a hotel lobby with a glass of wine on the table and a husband beside her checking stock tickers, me pretending I wasn't counting the hours since anyone touched my shoulder. She told me a story about a presentation that landed well. I told her the birds had come back to the maple over the porch and were arguing with the wind like old neighbors. "I love you, Dad," she said, when the words ran out. "We'll be home Friday." I hung on to those 3 words like a man with both boots in the river. "I love you more," I said, and I meant it the way a body means breathing. There was the soft clatter of a phone dropping into a purse. I should have placed mine back into its cradle and turned on the news, let the anchors tell me about floods and elections and scandals I could be righteously angry about from the safety of my chair. Instead, I sat there holding that old handset like it was hooked to my pulse. That's when I heard it. Her voice again, but not for me. "He left the burner on yesterday," Grace said to someone close by, her words muffled by a layer of leather and lipstick tubes. "It's time, Dylan. We can't keep pretending. He's a burden, and I can't. I can't babysit him anymore." My heart did a small, neat thing like a fist closing. I stared at the family photo on the mantel, our last Christmas before Evelyn couldn't climb stairs, the house still full of cinnamon and laughter, and waited for my name to make a different kind of sense. "A nice facility," Dylan replied, his tone all business, cool as coins. We'll frame it as a vacation with medical staff. 2 weeks to settle in, then we talk long-term. The market is still hot. If we list the house next week, we'll get 900, maybe more. It's irresponsible not to. We need to move on the golden place while we have a shot. Golden. He said it like a promise. Like I was a problem to be solved on the way to a view. My hand started shaking so hard the receiver knocked the arm of the chair. I set it in my lap and watched the living room realize it was empty. The evening sun cut through Evelyn's stained glass suncatcher and splashed color across the bookcase I'd built from cheap pine and 1,000 slow passes with a sanding block. The dust motes I hadn't noticed a moment before seemed almost intentional, like confetti thrown by a crueler man. Burden. There are words you think you're immune to because you have paid so dearly not to hear them. But I heard it again, the edges sharper this time when Dylan said it, like he was flensing something. A burden with a deed in his name, he added. But he's getting forgetful. If we position things, it won't be hard to get him to sign. I looked at the hands I had used to build this place, a lifetime of busted knuckles, hammer calluses, the soft V of old scars where a chisel slipped years back and kissed bone. Those hands had lifted my daughter from bathwater. Those hands had held my wife's face when the medication took her to a far country and left me with a body that breathed. I had thought grief was the worst a house could hold. I was wrong. The worst is hearing your own child turn a floor plan into a line item. The phone slid from my grip and thumped onto the braided rug. I didn't bother to pick it up. The house was all listening now, a body with 1,000 ears. I walked the rooms the way a man might walk a battlefield after the smoke clears, slow, careful, counting the losses. The kitchen window I had framed wrong the first time and rebuilt on a Sunday. The bay Evelyn wanted, the one I swore we couldn't afford until I found a way, because you do that for the person who makes your coffee and your life taste better. The groove in the hardwood where Grace had rocked her highchair off rhythm. The second bedroom that smelled faintly of cedar and talc because my wife touched everything like it could bruise. Every sacrifice has a signature. Mine was everywhere. I wish I could tell you I raged. That I threw a lamp or smashed a plate. That would be the righteous story. But the truth is simpler. The truth is I stood in the doorway to my old office and felt my knees go weak, and then I sat on the floor among neatly labeled file boxes and let a dozen years come through me like water through a sieve. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was worse, it was quiet. You can't hear a heart crack from across a room. You have to be the one wearing it. Evelyn's picture was on the desk, her in the blue dress, hair back, eyes doing that soft thing that made me believe God hadn't left the world. I picked it up and said, he called me a burden, the way a boy might show his mother a split knuckle. Our girl, she's planning to put me in a place. Silence. Then the grandfather clock in the hall ticked, 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 stubbornly in favor of life. The thing about being a builder is that even your grief learns a certain posture. We're trained to find plumb. To check the line. To brace what is about to carry weight. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth tick I understood that I had a choice. I could let their plan carry me, or I could become dead weight in it. I could move the load. I am not a burden, I said, and it wasn't bravado. It was a measurement. I opened the drawer where I keep the paperwork I don't want to think about. Birth certificates. The deed. The living will Evelyn and I wrote at a kitchen table with a lawyer who smelled like peppermint and made bad jokes about probate. I laid them out like tools. The deed was the important one, the ink old but unambiguous. Michael Hart. Owner. Joint tenancy had become mine alone when she died. All that pine and wire and drywall and labor belonged to a name that was still breathing. I found a business card under the rubber band on a bundle of receipts. A real estate attorney I'd once met at church. I held the card the way you hold an old nail you know will split the board if you push wrong. I placed it face down on the pile. Then I walked the house again, slower, this time counting blessings like a man who knows he might have to turn them to cash. On the mantel, I traced a groove in the wood no one else would see, a whisper from the day I shaped the profile with a router and learned the difference between almost and right. In the garage, I smelled motor oil and summer and the faint lemon of Evelyn's furniture polish that had soaked into the workbench. My hands remembered before my mind did, how to grip, how to lift, how to finish what you start. I know it sounds like I am stalling, telling you about wood and polish and empty rooms instead of the moment the knife went in. Maybe I am. Maybe I need you to understand that a home is not an asset until somebody you love calls it one. It's a living thing. When you sell it, if you must, you don't exchange property, you make a decision about who you're going to be without it. I stood at the kitchen sink long enough for the sky to go from orange to the color of bruised plums. Somewhere a dog barked. The maple leaves hissed. An ambulance wailed on College Avenue and then muted. I dried my hands I hadn't washed and reached for the phone. Before I dialed anyone, my daughter called back. As if the moment demanded symmetry. "Dad," she said, bright again, the performance back in place, the microphone lifted for a different audience. "Sorry," dropped my phone. "We were headed to dinner. How are you feeling tonight?" "Older," I answered, plain as bread. She laughed, a reflex. "We're bringing you a surprise from Phoenix." "So am I," I said, because truth has a way of lodging in your mouth when you've swallowed enough lies. "When you come home Friday, I'll have something waiting." "Oh," she sang, and in that silly little sound I heard the first step she ever took on these floors, her whole body tilted forward toward me. "Can't wait. We'll sort everything when we get back." She meant the nursing home brochure. She meant the budget made of my bones. She meant what Dylan had said when he thought I was a dead microphone in a dark room. "I love you," I said anyway, and I said it the way a man says a prayer over a field that might not yield anymore. "We love you more," she replied, almost automatically, and then the line clicked and it was just me and the kitchen again. I'm not sure what you believe about turning points. Maybe you think they come with their own music, that a brass section should announce when a life splits left instead of right. That wasn't my experience. My moment arrived wearing work boots and a quiet mind. It sounded like paper sliding into a folder and an old man opening his front door to a night that had stopped pretending to be kind. I drove to the office park where the attorney worked because doing something felt better than watching a clock. The parking lot was half empty. Lights glowed behind blinds like secret plans in a movie. I didn't go in. Not yet. I sat under the humming street lamp and wrote 3 lines on the back of a grocery receipt. They think I'm a burden. This house is mine. I am not done building. When I got home, I pulled the ladder from its hooks and changed out the bulbs on the porch light. It was after 10 by the time I finished, hands dusty, forearms smudged with something that looked like soot but smelled like resolve. The ladder went back smooth. The hinge gave a familiar squeal. I smiled. It felt like the house was reminding me who I was. Back inside, I stood at the threshold to the room where my wife's perfumes outlived her. I opened the jewelry box and breathed in the little ghost of jasmine and soap that rushed out like a summer I wanted back. I told her, again, about the word burden. I told her, again, about the plan forming like a bruise you know will bloom dark, then yellow, then gone. I asked forgiveness for what I was going to do to the only place we ever felt fully safe. Maybe you think I'm cruel. Maybe you think it's too much, selling a house to punish a child. But I need you to hear this, there are punishments that protect. There are lessons you only learn when the ground gives way and you realize you cannot float on someone else's back anymore. On my phone screen, as I stood outside later for air, a moth battered itself against the camera's lens like it wanted in. I watched it until it learned the glass and flew away. If this were a simpler story, I would tell you that was the night I stopped loving my daughter. But love doesn't have an off switch. It's a valve in the wall you can't get at without breaking tile. What I did was different. I stopped letting my love be used like a credit card. I wish I could claim I was brave. The truth is more ordinary. I was a builder, remembering the first rule they teach you when you carry other people's weight: if the beam is rotten, you don't paint it. You replace it. You shore up what will collapse. By Friday, when their keys didn't turn and the envelopes waited, my hands were steady. I had written the first letter of my life that felt like a building permit stamped with my own name. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was a line. Do not cross. This is only the beginning. You think you've heard the worst. You haven't. The second twist is the one that split me open. But for now, I need you to sit with this: the man they called a burden still knew how to carry a house. And the door they'd assumed would always open for them decided, at last, to stay shut. When people talk about betrayal, they make it sound like a single moment, like a knife slipped between your ribs in one swift motion. But I learned quickly that it isn't one moment. It's a slow pour. It's the drip of cold water on the back of your neck until you're shivering without realizing you've been standing in the rain the whole time. That Thursday morning after the phone call, I woke in the bed Evelyn and I had shared for 37 years, staring at the faint hairline crack in the ceiling above me. We'd never fixed it, because she thought it looked like a river on a map, winding from the fan to the far wall. The bed smelled faintly of her perfume still, an echo of something that used to be my life. I lay there longer than usual, thinking about the words Grace had used: burden and time. The way she'd said them, practiced, like she'd repeated them to herself until they didn't sound cruel anymore. I'd heard a lot of things in my life that stung: bosses telling me I wasn't qualified, neighbors making backhanded comments when Evelyn and I were young and just scraping by, but I'd never heard my own daughter talk about me like a problem to be solved. And Dylan, well, Dylan had never been shy about the fact that he married into our family for the comfort it offered. He was polished, sure, sharp suits, firmer handshake than necessary, that kind of man, but behind the polite words, I always sensed the measuring tape. He measured people by what they could give him. I moved through my morning routine on autopilot: shave, coffee, oatmeal. But the house felt heavier than usual, like the walls had leaned in during the night. I found myself wandering into the garage, staring at the shelves I'd built, the workbench littered with tools that still had Evelyn's handwriting on masking tape labels. Everything here had a purpose, except, apparently, me. Around 10, I stepped out into the backyard. The grass was a little too long. I'd been meaning to mow it. The maple tree was starting to leaf out again. Evelyn always said spring here was when the house wakes up. But this year, it felt like it was waking up to a foreclosure notice. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind. Grace's laugh after she said I had no idea. Dylan's flat tone about striking while he still trusts us completely. My stomach turned every time. For a moment, I considered confronting them directly. Picking up the phone, calling her cell, and saying, "I heard everything, Grace." But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how they'd respond: calm voices, denial, maybe even turning it on me. "You must have misheard, Dad. You're getting paranoid." No. If I was going to handle this, I needed proof they couldn't argue with. Proof and a plan. I spent the afternoon pulling old files from my office closet. I didn't even need to check most of them. Evelyn had kept everything in order. Receipts from Grace's tuition. The bills from her wedding. The bank statements from when Dylan lost his job and they temporarily moved in with me. I laid them out on the desk, one after another, and with each one I felt a mix of pride and nausea. Pride, because I'd been able to give them so much. Nausea, because none of it seemed to matter now. By 4 o'clock, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't just going to protect myself, I was going to make sure they understood, without a single doubt, that I was not the helpless old man they thought I was. I picked up the business card from the stack of papers: Todd Franklin, real estate attorney. Evelyn had insisted we get our affairs in order when her health started failing. I'd kept the card in case something happened to me. But now, I realized, it might be the card I needed to make something happen for me. I called and made an appointment for the next morning. Todd's voice was calm, unhurried, like a man who'd heard every kind of family dispute. "We'll talk through your options," he said. When I hung up, I walked through the house one more time, looking at everything through their eyes. I could see it, the listing photos, the description about custom details and craftsmanship, the dollar signs in their minds. They thought they'd already inherited it. And maybe, in a way, they had. I'd given them too much power already. But they were about to find out that I still owned more than just a house. I owned the choice of what happened to it. And that was something they hadn't planned for. Tomorrow, I would start making decisions. Quietly. Carefully. And when they came home, they would discover that the burden they wanted to put away had become the storm they never saw coming. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. Not that I'd set one, my body had just decided that sleep was a waste of time when there was work to be done. The early light was the pale gold Evelyn always loved, but instead of bringing comfort, it only sharpened the edges of my thoughts. I moved through the house like a stranger, touching things not for memory's sake but to take inventory, like I was already half a step out the door. On the kitchen counter sat a chipped mug Evelyn had bought at a roadside stand in Taos. Best coffee in New Mexico, the seller had claimed. We bought two. This one had survived 1,000 dishwashings. I poured my coffee into it and realized I'd been gripping the handle so hard my knuckles had gone white. I kept thinking about the conversation I'd overheard, not the words themselves, but the ease with which they said them. Grace and Dylan weren't plotting this like a reluctant necessity, they were excited. They'd already picked out their Boulder house. They'd already budgeted how much of my life they'd convert into square footage and stainless steel appliances. And here I was, sipping coffee in the kitchen I'd tiled myself on my knees over the course of one long weekend, because Evelyn wanted it finished before Grace's birthday. I remembered the exact way her voice lit up when she saw it. "Michael, it's beautiful." That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just hurt in the present. It sends out shockwaves into every memory you thought was untouchable. Suddenly, even the good moments are infected, because now you see what came after. I left the mug half full and went upstairs to my office, where the neat stacks of documents from the night before waited. On top were the tuition bills, for years of out-of-state rates at the University of Washington. I traced the numbers with my finger. I'd worked so many extra shifts for those payments that Evelyn used to call me the ghost in the house during those years. I was either gone or asleep, but it had felt worth it, an investment in my daughter's future. Now, looking at those figures, I realized I'd never once asked her for repayment. Never even hinted. My repayment had been watching her walk across the stage at graduation, her cap tipped back so I could see her smile. The second stack was the wedding receipts. I'd told her $8,000 was our limit. She'd cried until Evelyn took me aside and said, "Michael, she's our only child. We'll find a way." So I found a way. Nights installing crown molding for a contractor friend. Weekends retiling bathrooms for cash. 6 months of my hands aching every morning. All for one day of white lace and speeches about love and family. And then there was the BMW repair bill from last year, Dylan's precious car that needed a new transmission. $3,200 gone in a single week. He'd shaken my hand and called me a lifesaver. At the time, I thought he meant it. The more I looked at those papers, the more I saw a pattern, not of generosity, but of being mined. They dug into me bit by bit, year after year, smiling as they hauled the gold away. When the clock hit 9:15, I picked up the manila folder and walked out to the truck. The attorney's office was only 15 minutes away, but I drove like I was carrying explosives. Todd Franklin looked exactly the way I remembered, mid-50s, steady eyes, a handshake that didn't try to prove anything. His office smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. Michael, he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. It's been a long time. Too long, I answered, setting the folder on his desk. I need to talk about my house. He listened without interruption as I told him about the phone call, the overheard words, the plan to sell behind my back. He didn't even flinch at the cruelty in the details, just nodded slowly, like a man who'd seen this movie before. Legally, he said, the house is yours outright, correct? My name's the only one on the deed. Evelyn passed 2 years ago. Then they have no claim. They can't force you to sell or move. But if you want to sell, that's your right. You can move the money somewhere safe, and they'd have no legal access. I could feel the weight in my chest shifting. It wasn't gone. Betrayal doesn't vanish in one conversation, but it had found a counterbalance, control. How fast could it happen? I asked. With the right buyer? Less than 2 weeks. Cash buyers can close in 10 days if we line it up right. 10 days. That was all it would take to pull the ground out from under their feet. I left the office with a plan forming in my head, one that would hurt them exactly as much as they'd hoped to hurt me, but with the added sting of knowing I'd done it on my terms. When I pulled into my driveway, the house didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a stage. And I had just decided how the final act would play out. There's a difference between disappointment and betrayal. Disappointment is when someone you love forgets your birthday. Betrayal is when they throw you a party just so they can steal your wallet while you're blowing out the candles. By Friday morning, that difference was carved into me like initials in an old oak tree. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unhear the echo of Grace's laugh when she called me a burden, couldn't forget the cool efficiency in Dylan's voice as he talked about striking while he still trusts us completely. It wasn't just that they wanted my house, it was that they'd decided when and how to take it, as though my life was a spreadsheet and they'd found a way to balance it by erasing me. I stood in the living room that morning, staring at the framed photo on the mantel. It was from Christmas 5 years ago, Evelyn still healthy enough to cook, Grace in a red sweater, Dylan holding up a glass of wine like he belonged here. I remembered thinking that night, we're lucky. We're really, truly lucky. I didn't know then that luck has an expiration date. By noon, I'd made my decision, no hesitation, no second guessing. The house was going to be sold, and they would be the last to know. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything I needed to do. 1. Contact a realtor. 2. Arrange for a quick sale. 3. Find a secure bank to move the funds. 4. Disappear before they got back. It felt clinical, almost surgical. The same mindset I'd had back when I was managing construction projects, tight deadlines, no room for error. The stakes were different now, but the principle was the same: measure twice, cut once. That afternoon, I pulled out the spare key for the safe deposit box Evelyn and I had kept at the local bank. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years, insurance papers, original blueprints for the house, even the letter Evelyn had written to me when she was first diagnosed. The letter stopped me cold. Her handwriting was weaker than I remembered, but still hers. Michael. You have always been too generous for your own good. If I'm not here, promise me you'll protect yourself. Promise me you'll never let anyone treat you like you're expendable. I read it 3 times before I put it back in the envelope. I had broken that promise already. But now I could make good on it. That evening, I called Brian Connolly, a realtor recommended by Todd. His reputation was for speed and discretion. Mr. Hart, he said, after I explained my situation, I can have an investor lined up within 48 hours. We're talking cash, no contingencies. You'd be closed before your family knows it's even listed. That's exactly what I want. We arranged to meet the next morning for a walkthrough. When I hung up, I felt the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt since Evelyn passed: control. But the trust? That was gone. Not cracked, not strained, gone. Like someone had taken a crowbar to the foundation and pried it loose. I wasn't just preparing to sell a house. I was preparing to sell the last place I'd ever let my daughter hurt me. And when the door closed behind me for the final time, she would understand exactly what it feels like to lose the thing you thought would always be yours. That night, the house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you after a long day, but the kind that feels like the air itself has gone still, like the walls are holding their breath. I'd lived with silence ever since Evelyn passed, but this was different. Back then, the quiet was just absence. Now it felt like judgment. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like a question I didn't want to answer. The chair in the corner, Evelyn's reading chair, still leaned slightly to the left from years of her curling up in it. I sat there without turning on the lamp, letting the shadows smear across the room. The bay window she'd loved looked out over the maple tree, its branches swaying in the cold night wind. The movement made it look like the house was waving goodbye. I should have felt satisfaction knowing I had a plan. Instead, a heaviness settled over me. Selling the house wasn't just a way to outmaneuver Grace and Dylan, it was cutting the last tie to the life I'd built with Evelyn. Every wall, every beam, every corner had our fingerprints on it. And in a matter of days, it would belong to strangers. I thought about calling Grace, not to warn her, but to hear the version of her voice I used to know. The one that asked for help with math homework. The one that called me from college to tell me she'd passed a tough exam. But every time I pictured dialing, I also heard her say, "He's a burden." The betrayal didn't just hurt, it rewrote every memory. Even the good ones now carried a faint sourness, like milk left out on the counter too long. Around midnight, I wandered upstairs to the bedroom. Evelyn's jewelry box was still on the dresser, a thin layer of dust on its lid. I wiped it off with my sleeve and opened it. Inside were her pearls, a silver bracelet I'd bought her for our 25th anniversary, and a small envelope I didn't recognize. I slid the envelope open. Inside was a photo of Grace at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. Behind it, a note in Evelyn's handwriting. "She'll always be our little girl, Michael. Even when she forgets." The words hit me harder than I expected. Evelyn had always been able to see farther down the road than I could. Maybe she'd known this day would come. I lay down in bed without undressing, staring at the ceiling crack that looked like a river. I tried to trace its course in my mind, anything to avoid thinking about Friday, when they'd come home expecting a grateful old man and find only locked doors. Sleep came late, shallow and restless. When I woke, the early light through the blinds felt cold, almost metallic. I sat up slowly, feeling every year in my bones. The isolation was complete now. No calls, no visits, no one to confide in except a photograph of a woman who'd been gone for 2 years. I was invisible, except to the people who wanted what I had. And that was when I realized, if I was already invisible to Grace and Dylan, I could use that. I could move without them noticing until it was too late. I didn't know it yet, but that thought was the first step toward the clue that would change everything. It was a little after 9 the next morning when I found it. I wasn't looking for anything, just killing time before the realtor came for the walkthrough. The air in the house felt stale, so I started opening windows, one by one, letting the early spring breeze push the old air out. When I reached the small downstairs office, the one Grace and Dylan had claimed as temporary workspace, when they lived here rent-free, I noticed the bottom file drawer wasn't closed all the way. It stuck out maybe an inch. I bent down, figuring they'd left some of their clutter behind. What I found wasn't clutter. Inside was a thick manila envelope, the kind banks use for loan documents. Written on the front in Dylan's neat, corporate handwriting was, "Golden, offer and terms." That word, golden, rung like a bell in my head. I'd heard it before, in that overheard conversation. "We need to move on the golden place while we have a shot." I pulled the papers out and started reading. The first page was a real estate listing printout for a large, modern home in Golden, Colorado, 3-car garage, mountain views, 6 bedrooms. Asking price, $1.25 million. The second page was a signed letter of intent from Dylan and Grace to purchase the property, contingent upon securing funds within 30 days. The third page made my stomach knot, a personal statement of assets. Under expected funds, they'd listed sale of current family home, $900,000. Current family home. My house. Listed like it already belonged to them, like I was a footnote in their future. They hadn't just been talking idly in Phoenix, they'd already committed to buying the Golden Place. They were counting on the sale of my house to fund the down payment. I flipped through the rest of the envelope and found a printed email chain between Dylan and a mortgage broker. The broker was advising them to move quickly, because interest rates were expected to rise. Dylan replied, "We'll have the cash by the end of the month. My father-in-law just needs a little convincing." A little convincing. I sat there for a long moment, staring at those words. They were so certain, so casual. The kind of confidence you have when you think you're the smartest person in the room. I slipped the papers back into the envelope, tucked it under my arm, and carried it upstairs to my bedroom. If this was the game they wanted to play, then I had just been handed the rulebook. Because now, I wasn't just protecting myself, I was in a position to destroy the cornerstone of their future. If they'd already signed a letter of intent, failing to produce the down payment in time could cost them more than just embarrassment. It could damage their credit, their reputation, maybe even cost Dylan whatever scraps of his career he had left. When the doorbell rang at 10 o'clock sharp, I tucked the envelope into my dresser drawer and straightened my shirt. The realtor was here, and now I had a sharper weapon than I'd started the day with. What I didn't realize yet was how valuable that envelope would be when it came time for the second twist in this whole mess. Brian Connolly, the realtor, arrived right on time, sharp suit, polished shoes, clipboard in hand. He looked like a man who could sell ice to an Eskimo. But I wasn't the one who needed convincing. "Mr. Hart," he said, stepping into the foyer, "you weren't exaggerating. This place is immaculate." I let him walk the house, making notes and snapping photos, while my mind kept circling back to the manila envelope in my dresser upstairs. That letter of intent. Those asset statements. The casual arrogance of just needs a little convincing. When we got to the living room, Brian stopped in front of the bay window Evelyn had begged for. "Buyers will love this. Lots of natural light, beautiful craftsmanship." I nodded, barely hearing him. My thoughts were somewhere else entirely, on the fact that Grace and Dylan weren't just planning for my house, they were depending on it. And if I cut that leg out from under them, the whole table would collapse. After Brian left, I made myself a sandwich in the kitchen. Halfway through, I heard the creak of the mailbox flap outside. The mailman must have come early. I went to grab it, mostly bills and junk flyers, but one envelope caught my attention. It was addressed to Dylan Matthews at my address. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. My first thought was that it might be about the Golden House offer, maybe more paperwork. But when I slid it open, what I found stopped me cold. It wasn't about real estate at all. It was a formal notice of arbitration from the Financial Regulatory Authority. Dylan was under investigation for undisclosed client transactions and breach of fiduciary duty during his time as a financial advisor, his old job, the one he'd been let go from. I scanned the first page, and one sentence jumped out like it was printed in red. In the event of an adverse ruling, Mr. Matthews will be responsible for restitution of client losses in the estimated amount of $182,000. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about greed, this was about survival. Dylan wasn't trying to upgrade his lifestyle, he was trying to outrun a financial disaster. The sale of my house, the down payment on the Golden Place, it was all part of a plan to launder his image and stabilize his finances before the investigation ruined him. And Grace? Either she knew and was in on it, or she didn't care as long as she got her Mountain View kitchen. The betrayal suddenly had a deeper cut. It wasn't just that they were ready to toss me into a care facility, it was that they were willing to use my life's work as a shield against Dylan's collapse. I set the arbitration notice next to the Golden House documents. Together, they told a story much uglier than I'd imagined. If these papers ever found their way to the right people, or the wrong ones, it wouldn't just ruin their home-buying plans. It could ruin them entirely. I closed the drawer over both envelopes and sat back on the bed, the weight of what I'd discovered settling into my chest. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a loaded gun, and I was the one holding it. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel like the old man on the defensive. I felt like the one running the clock. I sat on the edge of the bed with both envelopes in my lap, my thumb rubbing over the creased edges. One contained the proof that Grace and Dylan had already spent my house in their minds. The other was a ticking time bomb that could blow Dylan's life apart. It would have been so easy to picture myself marching straight to Grace, slapping the documents down on the table, and watching the color drain from her face. I wanted that, God, I wanted that. But I knew better. If I went in swinging now, before the sale went through, before the money was in my account, I'd be giving them time. Time to backpedal. Time to charm. Time to spin the story so I became the unstable old man in everyone else's eyes. I could hear it already, Dad's confused. He's misinterpreting things. You know how he's been since Mom died. And the truth? They could be convincing. Dylan especially, he had that polished confidence of someone who'd been selling something his whole life. It wouldn't take much for them to find a lawyer who'd pick apart my decisions, maybe even stall the sale. But it wasn't just legal risk that gnawed at me. The arbitration notice made it clear, Dylan wasn't playing with house money. He was cornered. Cornered men do desperate things. If he caught wind that I knew about his investigation, he might not just fight back with words. I wasn't naive about danger. In my construction days, I'd dealt with subcontractors who thought intimidation was a bargaining tactic. I'd seen good men pushed to the brink over debt. Dylan didn't have calloused hands, but desperation makes anyone dangerous. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the maple tree swaying in the wind. Evelyn had always said, "Michael, you can't just hold the truth like a rock, you've got to decide if you're going to build with it or throw it." This wasn't a stone I could just chuck without thinking about where it landed. The documents weren't just leverage, they were a double-edged blade. If I swung them too soon, I could cut myself. So I made a choice. I would move quietly, sell the house fast, and put the money somewhere untouchable. Then, and only then, would I decide how to use what I knew about Dylan. Whether it was to block their future or end it. But keeping those papers hidden carried its own kind of risk. If they came back early, if they noticed anything missing from that office drawer, they'd know I'd been through their things. And if they suspected that, the element of surprise, the one advantage I had, would vanish. I locked the envelopes in the small fireproof box Evelyn and I had bought years ago for important papers. It wasn't much, but it was better than leaving them loose. I slid the box under the bed, the key on a ring in my pocket. As I straightened up, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face looked different. Not younger, not stronger, just sharper. The kind of sharp that comes from knowing you've crossed a point of no return. By the time I left the bedroom, I'd already drafted the next steps in my head. Keep my distance. Move the sale forward. Guard the documents like my life depended on it. Because maybe it did. The storm was coming, and I was standing in the only place where the lightning might hit twice. The first rule of building anything, whether it's a house, a business, or revenge, is that the foundation has to be solid. If the base is weak, the whole thing collapses under its own weight. By the time the weekend rolled around, I'd laid out the foundation in my head. The plan had to be invisible, methodical, and airtight. That meant every step I took from now on would have two purposes: the one they could see, and the one that would stay hidden until it was too late. Step 1. Move the sale forward without a whisper. Saturday morning, I called Brian Connolly to tell him I was ready to list. No open houses, no for sale sign in the yard, nothing to tip off the neighbors, or Grace and Dylan. It had to be handled through private channels. I have investors who'll pay cash to close in 10 days, he assured me. No MLS listing. We keep it quiet. Perfect. Step 2. Lock down the money. Before I could move forward with the sale, I needed somewhere secure to put the proceeds, somewhere they couldn't touch, even if they tried to get creative. That meant opening an entirely new account at a bank where I had no prior ties. On Monday, I'd be at Colorado Community Bank the moment the doors opened. Step 3. Play the part. If I wanted to keep them unsuspecting, I had to make sure my every move looked harmless. That meant answering calls with the same warmth they expected, letting them think I was still the grateful old dad who couldn't wait to see them Friday. I rehearsed the voice in my head, light, trusting, maybe even a little forgetful. It was strange, how quickly that act became second nature. Evelyn used to say I had a terrible poker face. Turns out, grief and betrayal make excellent teachers. Step 4. The logistics of disappearing. I began sorting through the house, not in a frantic, moving day kind of way, but with the precision of a man clearing out a crime scene. I packed Evelyn's jewelry box, our wedding photo, important documents, and a few personal things into a single suitcase. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the decades of home, would stay. It wasn't mine to keep anymore. Step 5. Guard the leverage. The 2 envelopes stayed in the fireproof box under my bed, the key always in my pocket. I checked the box twice a day, not because I thought someone would take it, but because the weight of what was inside was too great to leave entirely unattended. By Sunday afternoon, the outline of my plan felt stable. But stability is a funny thing, it can fool you into thinking you're safe when you're really just waiting for the next tremor. That tremor came in the form of a voicemail from Grace. Her voice was sugary, almost too much. "Hey, Dad. Dylan and I might be getting back a day earlier. We'll keep you posted. Love you. Earlier." The word made my chest tighten. If they walked through that door before the sale closed and before I moved the documents, everything could fall apart. I'd have to accelerate the timeline. Grace's voicemail kept playing in my head like a bad chorus, might be getting back a day earlier. That meant the clock I thought I had, 10 quiet, controlled days, just lost 24 hours. In construction, 1 day lost on a project can be patched over with overtime. In this, a day lost could mean the whole thing collapsing before the last nail was driven in. So I adjusted. Step 1. Lock in the buyer. Monday morning at 7:55 a.m., I was parked outside Brian Connolly's office before the lights were even on inside. When he unlocked the door, I was standing there with a folder under my arm. "Michael, you're early," he said, smiling like it was a compliment. "I want this done today, if possible," I told him, and there must have been something in my tone because his smile straightened into business. By 10 a.m., he had a cash buyer confirmed, an investment group that specialized in quick acquisitions for rental properties. They didn't want a home, they wanted an asset. That worked just fine for me. Contracts would be ready the next day, and if all went well, I'd have the money in my account before Grace and Dylan set foot back in Denver. Step 2. Secure the funds. From Brian's office, I drove straight to Colorado Community Bank. David Morrison, the private banker I'd spoken to on the phone, met me in a quiet conference room. I explained exactly what I needed: a premium account with maximum security, no joint access, and discreet handling of large wire transfers. "Once the sale closes, I want the funds moved here immediately," I told him. David nodded. "We can do that. You'll be the only signatory. No one else will be able to touch it." I walked out with account documents in my briefcase and the comforting weight of certainty in my chest. Step 3, the storage solution. One thing I refused to do was give them the satisfaction of finding their belongings neatly stacked in my house. I rented a climate-controlled unit at a storage facility across town, paid for 3 months in advance, and arranged for movers to haul every last box and personal item of theirs there on Thursday. Denver Moving and Storage would also keep a record of the transfer. That way, when they came screaming about their things being stolen, I'd have a signed receipt proving I'd simply relocated them, for their convenience, of course. Step 4, the exit route. I put a deposit on a furnished one-bedroom apartment in a senior community in Highlands, month-to-month lease, no questions asked. The manager, Mrs. Chen, seemed pleased to get the paperwork and deposit in one go. I told her I'd be moving in very soon. In my head, I gave it 3 days. Step 5, setting the trap. The coup de grace wasn't just selling the house. It was letting them find out the hard way. That meant no phone calls, no warning, and a locked front door with a message taped at eye level. I went out that afternoon and bought a high-quality lockbox with a key only I possessed. Inside, I'd placed 2 things, my letter explaining exactly what I'd done, and the storage receipt for their belongings. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, I ordered a small wireless security camera disguised as a USB charger. It would sit in the outlet by the front door, aimed perfectly to capture the moment Grace and Dylan arrived, tried their keys, and realized they were locked out of the future they'd already planned without me. I wanted to see their faces. Not out of cruelty, well, maybe a little, but because I wanted proof. Proof for myself that I hadn't imagined their greed, that I'd met it head-on and beaten it. By the time I went to bed, I'd moved the chess pieces as far forward as they could go without triggering the endgame. All that was left now was to sign the sale contract, move my essentials into the apartment, and wait for my daughter and her husband to walk straight into the storm they'd created. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Tuesday morning, the sky over Denver was that brittle kind of blue you only get in spring, clear enough to make you forget storms exist. I knew better. By 9 a.m., I was in Brian Connolly's office, pen in hand. The sales contract was exactly what I'd asked for. $890,000 purchase price. Cash deal. Closing in 10 days. 30-day possession for the seller after closing. I read every clause, every condition, the way I used to read blueprints, measuring each line for strength. When the notary slid the papers to me, I signed without hesitation. That was it. The house was sold. My house. Evelyn's house. Gone. And the best part? Grace and Dylan wouldn't know until the moment their keys didn't turn. The moving out without moving out. From Brian's, I drove straight to Denver Moving and Storage. 2 movers met me at the front door, strong guys in work gloves. "We're here for the Matthews stuff?" one asked. "That's right," I said, handing over the work order. "Everything in the downstairs office and the guest room closet." They worked fast. Within an hour, every last box and tote with their name on it was out of my sight, loaded into the truck, and headed to a storage unit across town. I kept the signed receipt in my pocket like a trophy. Now, when they accused me of tossing their things, I'd have proof I'd simply relocated them. The new locks. That afternoon, Eddie from AAA Emergency Locksmith pulled up in a white van, toolbox in hand. I told him I'd just bought the house from someone and wanted the locks changed immediately for security. Technically not a lie, just not the whole truth. In 40 minutes, every exterior lock was replaced with a shiny new deadbolt. The keys jingled in my hand like freedom. The apartment move. By evening, I'd moved the essentials into my new one-bedroom in Highlands, Evelyn's jewelry box, our wedding photo, the fireproof box with the 2 envelopes, my clothes, and a few personal things. Mrs. Chen gave me the keys with a warm smile. "Welcome, Mr. Hart. You'll like it here, it's peaceful. Peaceful was exactly what I wanted, after the storm hit. The trap is set. Wednesday morning, the package from Amazon arrived, my new USB charger camera. I drove back to the house under the pretense of checking the mail, plugged it into the outlet by the front door, and synced it to my phone. The angle was perfect. It would capture every second of their arrival, the confident walk up the steps, the fumbling with the keys, the dawning confusion, and, my favorite part, the moment they found the envelope taped to the inside of the glass. That envelope was ready too. In my neat, deliberate handwriting, the letter read: Grace and Dylan. I heard every word you said in Phoenix. The house is sold. The money is safe. Your belongings are at Denver moving and storage, receipt enclosed. You have 30 days to claim them. I am not your burden. I am your lesson. Michael. I sealed it, taped it at eye level inside the front door, and stepped back to admire my work. The waiting game. Thursday was my first night sleeping in the apartment. The air smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner, the furniture generic, the walls bare. But when I lay down in the unfamiliar bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. All I had to do now was wait. Tomorrow, they'd be home. Tomorrow, they'd try their keys. Tomorrow, I'd watch the moment they realized they'd built their future on someone else's foundation, and that I'd just knocked it out from under them. Friday afternoon, I sat in my apartment's armchair, the blinds half drawn, my phone balanced on my knee. The live feed from the hidden camera was open, the screen split between the front walkway and the little patch of yard beyond the steps. The battery indicator was full. The motion alert was armed. They'd said they might come home a day early. That meant they could arrive any time. My chest was tight, not from fear, but from the anticipation of a man who's been rehearsing this moment for days. At 4:42 p.m., the phone buzzed, motion detected, front entry. The feed lit up. There they were, Grace in a cream coat, sunglasses perched on her head, Dylan in his tailored navy jacket, the swagger in his walk unmistakable. They looked like people coming home from a weekend in Aspen, not two grifters walking into a trap. Grace dug in her purse, pulled out her key, and slid it into the lock. Jiggle. Push. Twist. Nothing. She tried again, slower. The confusion creased her brow. It's not turning, she said, her voice carrying just enough for the camera's mic to catch it. Let me try, Dylan said. He took the key, gave it a sharp twist, still nothing. His jaw tightened. Check the back. Grace disappeared from frame. 30 seconds later, she returned, shaking her head. Garage door remote isn't working either. That's when Dylan noticed the envelope, white against the glass, my careful handwriting spelling their names. His lips pressed into a hard line. He tore it down and ripped it open. Grace crowded in beside him, reading over his shoulder. Her face went pale first, the blood draining so fast it almost startled me through the screen. Then came the disbelief. He sold it? Dylan's eyes scanned the page twice. And he moved our stuff to storage. His voice was low, dangerous. Grace's voice rose. Where's the money? He says it's safe, what does that mean? It means, Dylan said, he's not as stupid as we thought. They stepped inside, the camera catching just a flash of their silhouettes before the door swung shut. I couldn't see them now, but I could hear them. Grace's voice was sharp, breaking at the edges. You told me we could close on Golden. You said the house money was guaranteed. I said it would be if you handled him, Dylan shot back. Instead, you. Me, she cut in, incredulous. You're the one hiding an investigation. Don't think I haven't noticed the mail you've been intercepting. Silence, then the dull thud of something, maybe a bag, hitting the floor. Dylan's voice came through, icy. Don't start with me, Grace. We have 30 days to get our things and figure out our next move. Unless your dear old dad decides to make that harder too. I smiled without meaning to. They still hadn't grasped it, this was their next move, and it wasn't one they'd chosen. Grace's voice dropped to a hiss. We find him. We make him explain himself. And then. Her words cut off. A door slammed. The feed went quiet. I sat back in my chair, the phone warm in my hand. They were already plotting a counterattack. Good. Let them. I'd planned for that too. Because the next part of my plan wasn't just about them finding out they'd lost, it was about making sure every step they took from here only buried them deeper. By Saturday morning, I was expecting them to show up at my apartment. Grace had that stubborn streak from Evelyn, the one that made her drive across town to argue in person rather than over the phone. So when I heard the knock at 9:17 a.m., I was ready. I'd already tucked the fireproof box containing both envelopes into the closet, the key on a chain around my neck. I opened the door just enough to fill the gap with my shoulder. Dad, we need to talk, Grace said. She looked tired, pale skin, eyes still puffy from what I guessed was a long night of fighting with Dylan. About? I asked, voice flat. You can't just, she started, but Dylan's voice cut over hers. This is theft. You sold property that's family-owned without consulting. It's not family-owned, I said evenly. It's mine. My name's on the deed. And now it's sold. Grace's eyes darted toward Dylan as if silently telling him to ease up, but he didn't. We had plans for that money, Michael. Important plans. I know, I said, letting the words hang. Golden, right? 6 bedrooms. Mountain view. The color drained from Dylan's face. Grace turned sharply to him. You told him? I didn't, Dylan said, but there was a tightness in his jaw now. I stepped back, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then I went for the kill shot. And Dylan, how's the arbitration going? He froze. Grace blinked. What arbitration? Bingo. I watched the shift happen in real time, her confusion hardening into suspicion, then snapping into fury. What is he talking about? She demanded. Nothing, Dylan said too quickly, but his voice had lost that smooth confidence. $182,000 in client losses isn't nothing, I said, my tone still level, like I was reading off a weather report. Breach of fiduciary duty. That's what the notice said. Grace turned on him so fast I almost stepped back. You've been lying to me? This whole time? I didn't want to worry you, Dylan said, his hands coming up in a defensive gesture. Her voice rose, sharp and shaking. You put my father's house in your little scheme to fix your mess. You told me this was about upgrading our life. It was. Dylan snapped. And it still could be if. Not anymore, I cut in. Not with no house, no down payment, and a wife who just found out you've been hiding 6 figures in liabilities. For a moment, nobody spoke. Grace's hands were trembling, her eyes locked on Dylan like she was trying to decide whether to scream or hit him. This isn't over, Dylan said finally, his voice low and dangerous. But I could see it in his eyes, he knew it was over. Maybe not the arbitration, maybe not his marriage, but the plan to bleed me dry had just died in my doorway. They left without another word. Grace didn't even look back. I shut the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of watching the power dynamic flip so fast they couldn't keep their footing. Until that moment, the revenge had been about money. Now it was about watching their alliance crumble from the inside. And I still had one more move to make. After they stormed out of my apartment, I didn't chase them. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I just let the silence work. Silence has a way of digging under the skin, forcing people to hear their own thoughts, thoughts they'd rather drown out with noise. I knew the cracks were already there. Grace now knew about Dylan's arbitration. Dylan knew she'd been blindsided. Trust like that doesn't heal overnight, not when the stakes are money, pride, and survival. But I wasn't going to rely on silence alone. If I'd learned anything in my years on job sites, it's that if you want a structure to come down, you don't just weaken the walls, you pull the supports all at once. Step 1. Pull Dylan's safety net. Monday morning, I made a quiet trip to the law firm listed on Dylan's arbitration notice. I didn't have to say much, just that I was a concerned family member with documents they might want to see. When the receptionist asked what documents, I slid the photocopies of the golden offer and terms letter of intent across the counter, along with their stated expectation of $900,000 from my house sale. "This isn't confidential to your case?" she asked. "Not unless you make it so," I replied. I left without asking what they'd do with it. I didn't need to know. I just needed Dylan to feel the floor drop under him when the arbitrators learned he was moving assets around in bad faith. Step 2. Close the sale and move the money. The following Thursday, I signed the closing papers at the title office. Brian Connolly gave me a congratulatory handshake, but the real satisfaction came when the wire confirmation slid across the desk, $890,000, minus closing costs, deposited into my new Colorado Community Bank account. That account was under my sole name, locked tight, and invisible to anyone who thought they had a claim. Step 3. Cut off the last access point. Before leaving the title office, I made one last call to Denver Moving and Storage. "You can release Unit 314 to its owners now," I said. I imagined Grace and Dylan getting that notification, realizing that the only things they still owned were cardboard boxes in a rented room, and even those came with a bill they'd have to pay to get back. Step 4. Deliver the nail in the coffin. That evening, I printed 2 copies of my letter, the same one I'd taped to the front door, but this time I added one more sentence at the bottom. P.S. If you're wondering how your mortgage broker found out about Dylan's arbitration, ask yourselves why you shouldn't have left your paperwork in my house. I mailed one copy to their old P.O. box. The other I slipped into the mailbox at the Golden property address, just in case their dream sellers enjoyed a little light reading. When I got back to my apartment, the sky over Denver was turning that deep purple Evelyn always loved just before night fully fell. I poured myself a glass of her favorite Bordeaux, sat by the window, and let the quiet settle over me. By now, they'd be sitting together, or maybe apart, reading those words. Dylan would know I'd torched his safety net. Grace would know she'd chosen a man who gambled her father's life's work and lost. And I? I was done building revenge. The structure stood, complete and unshakable. There was only one thing left, to lock the door and walk away. It had been 3 weeks since Grace and Dylan last stood in my doorway. 3 weeks since I'd watched the cracks in their confidence turn into fractures. 3 weeks since I'd finally stopped reacting, and started dictating every move. I thought maybe the quiet would feel strange after all that tension, but instead, it felt like breathing again. The last call. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. The caller ID just said, "Grace." I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear the sound of her voice now, when she had nothing left to take from me. When I answered, she didn't start with hello. "Dad, we lost the house we were trying to buy. The sellers, they found out about Dylan's case and backed out." I didn't say I know. I just listened. Her voice was soft, drained. "He's staying with his brother. I don't know if we're going to make it." "Grace," I said finally, "you made your choice the second you tried to take what wasn't yours. Now you get to live with it." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But it was the kind of sorry people say when they're sorry they lost, not sorry for what they did. I didn't reply. I just hung up. Letters in the drawer. That night, I opened Evelyn's old roll-top desk. In the smallest drawer, I kept 2 envelopes, one marked Grace, one marked my attorney. They were my insurance policy. Inside were every copy, every recording, every scrap of evidence I'd collected. If either of them ever came for me again, the envelopes would do the talking. But now, I felt no urgency to send them. Revenge wasn't about destroying them completely, it was about making sure they could never destroy me again. A different kind of wealth. With the house sold, the money secure, and my enemies sidelined, I decided it was time to invest, not in property, but in peace. I booked a month-long trip through the Rockies, stopping in small towns Evelyn used to love. I bought a second-hand camera and started taking photos of mountains, lakes, and winding roads with no end in sight. Every time I looked through the lens, I thought about how Evelyn always said, "The real treasure is the view you earn by climbing." I'd climbed. And now the view was mine alone. The truth that stayed twisted. Grace and Dylan would tell their version of the story, I was sure, how I'd been vindictive, how I'd blindsided them, how I'd stolen from them. Let them. Because the truth they'd never speak out loud was that they underestimated me. They thought the old man with the worn work boots was too sentimental to fight back. They were wrong. In the end, I didn't just protect my house, my money, or my name. I protected the last piece of myself Evelyn left me, the part that still believed I was worth standing up for. As I watched the sunset turn the Rockies into a jagged gold silhouette, I felt no more anger, no more urgency for revenge. I'd built my closure piece by piece, just like a house. And now that it was finished, I could finally walk through the front door, knowing no one else had the key.